Like Neil said, my name is Karen McDonald. I'm with Kuester Management Group, and we are very happy to be here tonight. We are an HOA professional management company headquartered in Fort Mill, South Carolina. So we're very happy to be here with you tonight. On my team, I have two of our other directors. I have our Director of Operations, Samantha Collins, and our Director of Management, Brian Wilson, who are in the back. During the question and answer time, please feel free to meet them and ask them questions. We're here to share as much information as we can with you tonight. And then Dawn Becker-Durnin, is that right? Did I say that right? She's at the back as well. We will introduce her formally. She was here with NFP. Tonight, I'm going to talk to you about, we're going to break it down into three things. So we're going to talk to you about defining a planned community, roles and responsibilities within your community, and professional management services, okay? And most of you, based on Neil's, I got to stay here. Okay. All right. So the first one is defining what is a planned community. So some of the things that you need to know about what makes a planned community a planned community. So each owner has exclusive ownership of their home, right? So each of you, unless you live in a condominium association, and do we have any condo association members here tonight? Okay. I didn't think so. I figured most of them are probably going to be single family, or how about any townhomes? Some few townhomes. Okay. So all of you have exclusive ownership to your personal home, right? And then you also have, well, the association owns the common areas. You also have very specific rights to those common areas, right? So as an owner, you are guaranteed certain rights. And as we talk about the roles and responsibilities, I'll share a little bit about those rights that you have as owners, because I think it's important to understand what your roles and expectations are to make your community the best as possible, but also what your rights are as a homeowner, making sure that your board of directors, any other management company, those type of things that you may be working with, you are working in honoring those rights that you have. Another thing that makes it a community association provides a communal basis for preserving, maintaining, and enhancing homes and property. So how many of you have some kind of common space? You have monuments, you may have pool, clubhouse, you have parks, those type of things. So that's the role and responsibility of your association as a whole, is to properly maintain those. And then they're nonprofit organizations. So one of the things that we commonly get, just as a misconception, when you say you're nonprofit, that does not mean you're tax exempt, right? So that's something that we'd like to make sure people understand, is that while you are entitled to certain benefits, you still do potentially pay taxes. So you have property taxes that you'd pay. You pay them at a reduced rate in York County, but you still do pay property taxes as an association for your common areas. The other thing you have is traditionally you do not pay income tax to state and federal, but you are required to file your income taxes. So that's something we always like to make sure people understand, especially some of the associations that have been self-managed. They come to us and we say, have you filed your tax returns? And they say, no, we're a nonprofit. We don't need to do that. That's not true. You need to make sure you're filing your tax returns each year. You're not really going to ever pay taxes unless you have a large income source. So sometimes we'll see, like we have some larger communities that we work with that collect fees to do lots of different activities. They have professional speakers come in. They have dinner parties, those type of things. They're looking at potentially filing income tax and paying state and federal income taxes. But most of the associations in this area, that's probably not going to be true for you, but you still do need to make sure those are filed. Okay? All right, so now the three basic characteristics, mandatory and automatic membership. So another question that we often get is, what if I don't want to be in my HOA or my planned community anymore? I want out. You'll be surprised the number of homeowners that would potentially come in and say, I want to send a letter and I don't want to be part of the association anymore. That's not an option. Membership is mandatory per your deed restriction, right? So on your deed, when you purchase that home, you have membership into that particular community. Mandatory assessments. So assessments are required because that's how you're going to pay for the common areas. And mutual obligations between owners and communities. So as we talked about briefly, we're going to continue to talk about part of being in an association is that there are mutual obligations of both the association and the owners in order to preserve and protect the association. Okay. And types of communities. So we have just listed a couple types of lingo that you may know. Some of you are going to say live in homeowners associations or HOAs. Some of you are going to live in property owners association, POAs. Townhome owner associations, so those of you who live in the townhomes. Planned unit development is also some of our older associations. We don't see that a whole lot in the newer associations, but we do have a few of those out there. And then master planned communities. So just kind of basically they're all going to mean the same thing. The only real difference, your master planned community is going to often include some kind of commercial space, mixed use space. So for those of you who are like Baxter Village, the large community in Fort Mill that has both the commercial space and the residential, that would be a master planned community. Okay? All right, so then the purpose. What is the purpose of the HOA? So we often also get the question of, why do I care about the HOA, right? Why should I be a part of it? So there are some specific purposes. So the purpose is to manage common area of the property, right? So to make sure they're preserving and protecting, to manage property interests of the owners. So each of you have invested, and most of you, it's probably your largest investment is your home. And so part of that role, the responsibility, is to make sure your other homeowners are following the rules, the main areas are being maintained, so your property values stay where they need to be. Okay? And provide service to the owners. So they may have, some associations may provide different services. They may have clubs, they may have swim teams, those type of things. And then just to develop a sense of community through social activities and or amenities. So if you have a clubhouse or a pool, or maybe you have, some of the communities here locally, they have at Halloween trick-or-treating for the community. They have, holiday events, those type of things. And that's what the purpose of that planned community really is designed to do, to encourage the overall. All right, so next question is what governs a planned community? So just kind of put up real briefly for you, just some things you need to be aware of. So first of all, you have regulations, state, federal regulations, court decisions. So you have the Nonprofit Corporation Act. As we said, planned communities are nonprofit organizations. So South Carolina has a Nonprofit Corporation Act that governs your association. There's also a new Community Association Act that the Morton Gettys representative is going to speak to you about. That just went into play this year. So again, that's something that's extremely important when he speaks to you tonight, to pay attention to those details, because there's some filing requirements that's very important that you make sure all of your association documents are filed as of January 10th of this year. And then the Horizontal Property Act would just apply to condos. We already said we don't have any, so we're not going to go into that. But beyond that, you also have your community governing documents. So I put them in order of hierarchy. So what supersedes the other? So you have your recorded map, plat, inter plans. So that's going to outline what lots and homes in an association are part of your association. So sometimes you'll see, we have homeowners, surprisingly enough, that they'll say, they'll come into the office and they'll say, I'm not part of the association. And we say, what do you mean you're not part of the association? Well, yeah, for whatever reason on that recorded plat, there's one little house right in the middle of the association that wasn't included, right? So we do have that happen from time to time. The next thing you have is your declaration of covenants, conditions, and restrictions. So sometimes in South Carolina, it's called a master deed. So you may have a master deed if you don't have CCRs as a common that you'd listen to. So that's going to tell you things like what is your board of directors' ability to assess your community? What type of assessments do you have? If you're a declarant-controlled association, when is that turned over to the association members to manage? So it's going to basically tell you, it's going to give you rules and regulations or covenant restrictions. How do you have to perform within your community, maintain your property? You're going to have articles of incorporation. That's the document that brings your association into existence. So that's going to just lay out the purpose of the association. You're going to have your bylaws. So if you ever wonder, what are the meeting requirements? What are the notice requirements? How do you elect the board of directors for our association? You're going to go to the bylaws. Those are going to tell you the administrative items of your association. Then you're going to have your rules and regulations and your board resolutions. So the rules and regulations and the board resolutions are things that most of the documents allow your board of directors to create for you. So they don't have complete control to do whatever they want to do. They have to be within the restrictions provided in your other governing documents. Okay? But it is important to know that those rules and regulations, those resolutions are there. And we'll talk a little bit more when we talk about what the responsibility of a board member is, about the importance of using resolutions, to ensure that all homeowners are aware and understand how the operation of the association works. All right, so some common community rules. So I'm just kind of going through some of the things that we see. a lot of associations have restrictions, and they're there for a reason. So oftentimes we will get homeowners who are upset because one of the things our team does is we do compliance letters. So unfortunately, we're sometimes not liked when we have to send a homeowner a letter that says, you haven't mowed your lawn properly, or you haven't put your trash can away, or you're not picking up after your pet, those type of things. But those rules are there for a reason. It's important as a board of directors. How many board members do we have here? Do we have some board members here? All right, lots of board members. So one of the things that is often hard for board members to do is enforce those rules and regulations, right, or those covenant restrictions. But it's extremely important that you do that because that's how you're going to preserve and protect the association, and that's what those homeowners who purchased that home are depending on you enforcing those rules and regulations, right? And basically it boils down to that we all have a responsibility as an owner to understand and abide by the association in order to properly preserve and protect it. Okay? All right, so now we're going to get into, kind of walk through what is the association. Now we're going to talk about sort of the roles and responsibilities. So who's on first? So we're going to talk about the board of directors and what are their roles and responsibilities, homeowners and what are their roles and responsibilities, government organizations. So how do other things like the City of Rock Hill ordinances, how do the police department, those type of things, how do they fit into the function of your association, your community as a whole, and then management companies, and what role do we have in it? Okay. So first, board of directors. What is their role? So their role is to set and enforce reasonable policies for the association. It's important to know, as we talked about briefly already, that the roles and the ability to set and enforce rules is not unlimited, right? And homeowners, so if there's any of the homeowners out here, you need to understand that your board of directors do not have unlimited power, right? In your governing documents, you'll see the word shall or the word may, right? So those are things to pay attention to, right? And for board members to know the difference between shall and may, right? So shall is you have to do that. May is you may do it if you want to do it. So those are some things to keep in mind when you're reading your documents. To enforce governing documents, maintain the community property, maintain financial stability. So what does it mean to maintain financial stability? That means you're creating a budget every year. That means you're looking at your assessments and making sure that you're not only covering your operating costs for the year, but also you're planning for the future, right? So you don't want, and putting money away in reserve, you don't want to get, in 3 years from now, say that you have some large capital expenditure, especially for those of you in the townhomes, right? So the townhomes is a great example. If an association is not putting away money for their roof, and then all of a sudden your roof needs to be repaired, right? The association is going to have to come, the board of directors is going to have to go to that homeowners and say, we need a special assessment. And that's the last place you want to be as a board of directors. So that financial stability and ensuring you're thinking about and planning those things, like doing a reserve study, making sure you're analyzing those needs is extremely important. Okay? You have a duty to purchase adequate insurance. So one of the things that Dawn will talk to you about later tonight is directors and officers insurance. If you do not have directors and officers insurance, she's going to share with you the reason that you need to have that for yourself as board members. I saw most of your hands go up that you're board members. But also making sure that your association assets are properly insured, right? So if you have a playground, a pool, clubhouse, monuments, those things need to be covered. You need to have liability insurance in case somebody gets hurt on your property. They have a duty to contract negotiation and execution. So one of the things that we often see is that the board of directors has a duty to contract with vendors, right, and negotiate those contracts. Homeowners do not have a right to vote on that contract. They do not have a right to see that contract unless they have a written reason why. So that's something that, well, a lot of boards will be transparent and they'll potentially provide that contract after the contract negotiation is complete. Boards, that's something that you need to understand that homeowners, well, you want to be transparent with them. They do not have a right. They'll often come in and say, why didn't we get to vote on that landscaping contract? Or why didn't we get to vote on, one of that contractors? That is, when they elect you as their board of directors, that's an authority that they're giving you as a board of directors. Okay? To keep full and accurate records of the association activities. So you need to keep meeting minutes, both your board meetings and your annual meeting minutes. You need to create and supervise committees, and you need to conduct association meetings. That's a lot of roles and responsibilities, right? And what we'll talk about is some of the benefits. If you do have a larger community, it can absolutely get a little overwhelming, and that's where management companies come in at whatever level you choose to help accomplish some of those and not make it a full-time job instead of a volunteer job, right? Because you all get paid so well to do that, right? All right. Some of the positions, since most, I'm not going to spend a lot of time in it, since most of you say you are on the board of directors, but we have traditionally a president, vice president, secretary, treasurer, and a member at large. So your president is going to be your chief executive officer. They're the person who is charged with setting agendas, presiding over meetings, executing legal documents. Your vice president, just like with the United States, is that step-in person if something, so for some reason the president is not in the meeting. Your secretary is in charge of distributing agendas, keeping meeting minutes. Your treasurer is in charge of the financials, so creating that budget, distributing the assessments. And those things, a lot of those tasks, again, may potentially be distributed to a management company if you have a management company. And then the member at large often will just serve any tasks specific that the board of directors may ask of them, and then serve as a committee liaison, potentially. Okay. And the only other thing I think that often comes up that's good to know is the difference between who is a director and who is an officer, right? So most of your documents will state that you're electing directors to the board, whether it's 3, 5, 7, and then that board of directors is who elects amongst themselves the officers. So that's something that's oftentimes some confusion among homeowners as to, how do they elect just the president? How do they elect the secretary? So that's just something that's good to know. All right, so now we're talking about homeowners. What are the homeowners' responsibilities? So they have the responsibility to read and comply with governing documents, right? Follow the rules that we talked about. They have the responsibility to maintain property according to established standards, to treat community leaders and fellow neighbors with honesty and respect. And I think that's a big one for homeowners to remember, right? So oftentimes the board of directors, and when we see, they will, if there's something going wrong in the community, they are being attacked, right? That it's their fault. And I think it's really important that homeowners remember that board members are volunteers, homeowners who live in the community just like they do, and they deserve to be treated with honesty and respect because they, whether you agree with their decision or not, they're still making the best decision for your neighborhood. Homeowners need to be the eyes and ears of the community, right? So the board of directors are not going to always see everything, even if you have a management company. Management company is not going to always see everything. So it's important that every member of the homeowner association or the planned community, even in those associations who maybe you don't have an official association, you just live in a community, right? Whether it's neighborhood watch or whether it's a stop sign that was hit that needs to be reported. Those type of things, it's really important that you take the initiative, not just let it go and wait for somebody to address it, but just pick up the phone and call and let somebody know. Having a duty to pay community assessments in a timely manner. Keep contact information up to date. So that's something else that we often find is homeowners will move. They'll change their email address. They'll change their phone. They will not notify the board of directors. They will not notify the homeowners or the management company. It's extremely important that homeowners do that so we can reach out to you. Okay? Ensure residents residing on their property adhere to all rules and regulations. So this seems like it would be common sense. But one of the things I think is extremely important to remember is you probably all have homeowners in your association who may lease their home out to a tenant, right? So something that's very important that homeowners understand is when you do that, you are responsible for that tenant, right? So if the person who's renting your home doesn't put their trash can away, doesn't maintain their lawn, doesn't follow the governing documents, it's your job as the homeowner to ensure that that is corrected and taken care of. Okay. And then to foster just a general sense of community spirit and togetherness, right? So attend your board meetings if you can. Attend your annual meetings. Attend those meetings or those events that your board puts on because they go through a lot of time and effort to plan those, and it just creates a sense of community. Yeah. All right, homeowner rights. So we talked about the responsibility or the responsibilities, the rights. What rights do they have? So homeowners have the right to a responsive and competent community association, right? So boards, they have the right to be responded to email, responded back to when they send emails, they call. And to manage, your management company should be responding back to them. Ability to participate in governing the community association. Again, do they need to look at contracts, vote on contracts? No. But do they need to be allowed to sit in and just listen to a board meeting if they choose? Absolutely. Do you need to have regular, at least once a year, you're having an annual meeting where they can come and they can hear what's going on in the association? Receive fair and equal treatment. So one of the big things that we often see is that it's really hard to, most boards try to always treat everybody fairly, right? But it's really hard to do. So what we always say is in order to ensure that all of your homeowners are receiving fair and equal treatment, make sure you have two pieces of simple policy in place. One is a legal collection resolution. That's going to outline how do you deal with your delinquencies, right? So if you have your neighbor who happens to be your neighbor for 10 years and who's a really close friend, they become delinquent. As a board member, you do not want to have to make a decision, do I lien that property, right? Because somebody down the street that you don't know, it's easier to lien than your neighbor who you do know, right? But it's important you're treating everybody equally. So put a legal collection resolution in place if you don't have it, just to protect yourself and take that hard decision away from you if that time has to come. And the other one is compliance resolution, right? You don't want to have somebody come to you and say, you keep violating me for parking on my grass, but the neighbor 3 houses down, you never violate them for parking on their grass. You're treating me differently, and that's not fair, right? You never want to be in that situation. So the easiest thing we always recommend, the first thing any new communities come to, we talk to them about legal collection resolution, compliance resolution. Okay? They have a right to receive all their governing documents, so they have a right to request that and make those available. They should receive them at closing, but also the board has a duty to provide those to them, make sure they have access to them. Now that's something that with the new rules or the new act that came in South Carolina, those are all recorded now that they'll talk about a little bit later, so they can go online and get those, makes it a little bit easier. And they have the right to live in a well-maintained community. So as a board of directors, you have that financial responsibility again to make sure you're planning so you're able to keep your community in a well-maintained manner. Okay, so governing organizations. So we talked about the board of directors, we talked about the homeowners. How do government organizations work in with your association? So the first thing are the cities, right? So city has city ordinances. So that's something that people sometimes get confused about, the difference, right? So your governing documents may tell you that you have to maintain your property in an attractive manner, right? So what does that mean? And how do you deal with that? But also, the city ordinance will tell you grass cannot be over a certain height, right? So you have to remember that your property is subject to both city ordinances and your planned community governing documents, okay? Local police department, a lot of the things that, remember that you want to remember to report it to the right agency, right? So if you have a dispute with your neighbor, it's not calling your board president and saying, Susie down the street never puts her dog on a leash, right? That's also a city issue, right? So the board can help you, but that's also, if there's a leash law within the city, they can't do that, right? Street parking. Street parking is whether it's allowed or not is a huge question in a lot of communities, and that really depends most of the time on the city rules in your particular area, unless your documents say differently. Okay. And then just things like if there's a theft or vandalism, some kind of emergency, make sure you're contacting the police department, the fire department, the appropriate agency, not calling your board of directors, right? And I'm sure some of you board members probably get those calls periodically if something happening that's really not something that's your responsibility as a board member. All right, so community management, kind of getting into what role do we have. So you have 3 different community management levels, really. So you have self-management. So some of your communities are going to be really small, and you may have self-managed because it just does not make financial sense for you to have a full-time management company. We have some communities that have association employed manager. Do we have any associations in here who have a manager on site that your association employs? Okay, good. We always recommend against that because it's just a liability risk that just doesn't really make much sense unless you have an extremely large community. And then management companies. So we have a community manager that's employed by your management firm and contracted by your board of directors. Okay, so we're just going to talk a little bit about community management. So what is the role of the community manager? So sometimes boards will come into us and they'll say, our management company, our community manager tells us what to do, when to do it, and they completely run the association. That's not the role of your community manager, right? And that should not be the role of your community manager if that's the case. Your community manager should absolutely execute and carry out the day-to-day operations, right? But they should be executing at your direction, right? So that's something that's important to know. They should implement the decisions of the board. They should administer the services, programs, and operations of the association within the policies and guidelines. They should fulfill the terms of their contract. So the contract should be outlined with clear details of what those roles and responsibilities are. and they should provide professional information, training, and often leadership to you, right? So you should be able to go to that management company and say, hey, here's a situation that we're having. What situation have you experienced in other communities? And they would be able to help guide you through that. So manager's authority is something to also talk about. So what gives the management company an authority? So there's authority based on their governing documents, the written management agreement, the contract, and the delegation of specific authority provided to the board of directors. Okay? So again, just to remind you that the authority is only what you as a board of directors is giving that management company. Okay? And the services provided, oftentimes there's going to be physical services, administrative and clerical services, building and amenity maintenance, and ground maintenance. So, and it really depends on what your community needs and what the management company is that you're working with. All right, so I have 5 minutes. Okay, so real quick, I'm just going to tell you a little bit about Kuester Management Group and what the benefits of a professional management company can do for your association. How many of you have a management company at this time? Okay, most of you. Okay, so probably most of you understand and know, but I'm just going to tell you a little bit of what's different about our company. We are locally owned and operated. We're headquartered in Fort Mill, South Carolina, right now 160. Many of us live in the Rock Hill community and are active in the community, so we know and understand what it means to need to take care of the communities here. We have over 175 partner communities throughout North Carolina and South Carolina. We're best-in-class management. We have highly trained professionals. One of the things that we do is you may have seen as we flip through these slides, there's a little symbol that says CAI, that's Community Association Institute. That is an organization that association management companies can voluntarily get involved with, and they offer certification to their managers. So our community managers are certified. We do continuing education, just like many other licensed professionals would at the state. Okay. We have cutting-edge technology. All of our programs are web-based, so we can be out in the field with you, and we can take care, we can pull up on our project management tool. You can see our quotes. You can see, our big thing is transparency, right? So big complaints we get is transparency. The boards don't know what the management company is doing, and you're waiting until that meeting to find out, hey, did they do what we asked them to do last month or not? So we use cutting-edge technology just to kind of take that out and to provide you very transparent management. Okay. We also use a team-based management. So a lot of times we will have management companies that we have people we work with, and they say our manager does everything. They do our violations, they oversee our financials, they answer the phone calls from the homeowners, and we don't feel like that's an effective management tool. So you would all have a community manager that's assigned to you. We have a customer support team that all they do is answer homeowner phone calls and emails every day. So, and we have a tracking system, so it will tell you how long it takes us to get to their first response, how long it takes us to resolve that ticket, and when the ticket is resolved, the homeowner gets a survey, and they rate us. So it tells us what the satisfaction rating is. And I'm very happy to say in our January numbers, I think our satisfaction rating was at 92%. So we're very proud of that. We take that very seriously. Our response time is less than 10 hours. And the biggest thing is multi-level management options. I'm assuming we have out here today many different size of organizations, right? So one of the things I like to say about us, we are a local family-owned company. We're big enough to bring you the professional and the technology to make your to help really manage your community in an effective way, but we're small enough to be able to modify our services to meet your needs. Okay? Fiscal services, just going to run through. We do budget preparation, monitoring, assessment billing, delinquent enforcement, investment management, reserve planning and budgeting, financial audit and tax filing, contract management, vendor payment management, preparation of monthly financial packets. So vendor payment management, what are we doing there? We are making sure that all the vendors that your association that our partner associations use have submitted us W-9 forms, and they have submitted a certificate of insurance. So we're making sure that liability, if a vendor gets hurt on your property, is not coming back to the association. So that's extremely important. Administrative and clerical services. We provide prompt and professional responses to homeowners through the support team that we talked about. We provide online homeowner portals. So every partner association, those homeowners can go online. They can see their account history. They can make payments. They can see their governing documents, a community calendar. We do board meetings and association meetings. So we do agenda preparation, manager reports, prepare and distribute meeting notices. We provide PowerPoint presentations. We help guide you through that entire meeting process. We provide board member education. We provide 2 full seminars at least twice a year. And then we oftentimes will partner with other attorneys, insurance professionals, those type of things to do education, much like tonight. We have electronic processing of architectural applications, and we have covenant compliance. So one of the great things about our compliance process that we provide is that we take a picture of the photo, or take a picture of the violation and attach it right to the letter. So that's something that a lot of our communities that come to us really like, that they don't always see. Okay? Building and grounds, we do approved vendor management, regular community inspections, coordination of projects, expense projection, risk management, making sure that your items are properly insured, working alongside insurance professionals, capital improvement and insurance claim management, maintenance responsibility chart. So for those townhomes, you should have a maintenance responsibility chart that clearly outlines what is a homeowners association, or what is the association's responsibility versus what is the homeowner's responsibility. So you don't have one person calling and saying, hey, my door needs to be replaced, and somebody says, okay, let me replace it. And the next person calls and says, I want my door replaced, and they say no, right? So that's an issue. So make sure we strongly recommend maintenance responsibility charts. Short and long-term maintenance scheduling, association assessment inventory, and association goal planning. Okay? So, those are, real quickly, all the services we provide. It's a lot thrown at you. A couple things. If you want to see a full presentation of this information, if you provide an email address to one of our team members, we will be happy to email that presentation to you. If you want to share that with other board members or community members. We also have a full sheet breakdown of all those services that we provide and what the types of services that would fall into. Okay? But basically, service packages, we have full service management starting at $500 a month, just depending on the size of your community and how many homeowners you have in your community. We also have accounting only management. So if you have a smaller community, you say there's just no way $500 just won't work for us financially, right? We have accounting only services. And we also have consultation services. So that's, we can help you do certain things, hard, difficult things that may come up through the year. And a lot of times what we'll do is smaller communities will have accounting-only services, and they'll add different things as they need them. Okay? And so we normally do our consultation services as at $75 an hour, but for anybody who is the Rock Hill Council Neighborhood member, we are offering that at $50 a rate. Okay? Okay. And that is all I have.
My name's Nate Pierce. I'm an attorney here in town with Morton and Gettys. I do a good bit of work with homeowners associations and commercial real estate litigation. What I figured I'd do tonight is walk you through some of the general points of the new HOA Act, talk about some other recurring issues that I see with HOAs and their governance, and then open it up to any questions that you've got. So I'm going to dive right in. Was this able to be distributed, the points? If not, I can email it out after the fact. As most of you are probably aware, the South Carolina Homeowners Association Act was passed last year. The first filing deadline was January 10th of this year. If you go through the act, there's about 5 basic things that you need to remember. The first and most important for your everyday governance is going to be the new recording requirement. Master deeds and covenants have always needed to be recorded with the clerk of court's office. The new act goes a step further by requiring that your bylaws and any other rules and regulations that you would like to remain in effect also be filed with the clerk of court's office. So while a lot of people do right off the bat file their bylaws along with their master deed or their covenants, not everybody does. So if you have not filed them by now, then you would need to file them or repass them actually and file them by January 10th of next year for them to be in effect. So that's something to be thinking about. The act is not very clear as to what rules and regulations means. So if you have any architectural review guidelines, standards of behavior in your community, anything that conceivably you would want to enforce in your communities, go ahead and get those filed with the clerk of court to be safe. The act prescribes some enhanced notice requirements for budget increases. If you are going to be conducting business at a meeting where there's going to be a budget increase, you're now required to give at least 48 hours notice. However, there's a big caveat here. This does not apply if you are organized as a nonprofit corporation. Is anyone here organized as a nonprofit? Do you know? Who doesn't know? Who does not know what they are organized as? Okay, you want to figure that out. South Carolina Secretary of State has a great website. You go in, type in the name of your association, and it'll tell you what you're filed as. It's important to know. The Act also provides for magistrate court jurisdiction, which is a very good thing. Up till now, if you were going to file a declaratory judgment action or some other action against a delinquent homeowner in your community, you're going to have to file in circuit court, which is a little bit more expensive, a little bit more involved, and does not allow for self-representation. So by providing magistrate court jurisdiction in the new HOA Act, it does provide the opportunity for HOAs to represent themselves whenever they have trouble with tenants. And we're going to talk a little bit more about self-representation in a couple of minutes. Now, one of the parts of the Act that's getting a little bit of head shaking, or people not really understanding why they did it, is it allows the South Carolina Department of Consumer Affairs to accept complaints from HOA boards and homeowners as well. It does not provide the Consumer Affairs Department any authority to actually act on those complaints. It simply allows them to take the complaints and exchange the complaints between the parties. So we're expecting there might be something coming down the pipe later that actually gives this some teeth. The last major provision, and a lot of people do this anyways at this point, is there is a disclosure requirement in the new Act. If you sell a home that is subject to HOA governance, you have to disclose that. If you don't, then you're looking at civil liability, potentially. It's a lot like the Residential Property Conditions Disclosure Act. If you've ever bought a house, you've seen that form. So it's a lot like that. So make sure that you're not opening yourself up to liability or allowing the people in your community to do the same whenever they're selling a home. Did a little digging around today. There's some talk that some more legislation might be coming down the pipe in the next few years. We would expect that to look something like the Horizontal Property Act. Is anyone here organized as a horizontal property regime? There you go. We got one. Party people. The Horizontal Property Act has a more structured way that describes what your master deed is supposed to say, the different elements that it's supposed to lay out, things like that. We expect, in the next few years, the HOA Act will probably be beefed up to include some more stringent requirements to provide a little more guidance, because right now it's kind of like the Wild West. I mean, your covenants or your master deed can say largely whatever your heart desires. Okay, so they asked me also to talk about some general issues that I see that recur. The first one is amendment procedure. Can anyone in here right now tell me your amendment procedure? All right, Neil. Well, you're running the meeting, Neil. It doesn't count for you. Come on. It's not fair.
It costs money.
There you go. It costs money. So in your governing documents, there's going to be a provision that prescribes how you change your governing documents. This is very important to understand because they vary from neighborhood to neighborhood. Typically, it's going to require some percentage to change the covenants. It's going to usually a lesser percentage to change the bylaws. Sometimes the board can change the bylaws unilaterally. The important thing to remember is, first off, follow the terms of your governing documents. I know you've already heard that from Karen, but it can't be reiterated enough. Follow the terms of your amendment procedure to the T. Reduce any amendment that you come to writing. Formalize it either with board action, with a vote at a meeting, and then reduce it to a board or meeting resolution, and then file it. File it, file it, file it. Whenever the new act was coming into effect, I had a lot of people coming into the office saying, here's our documents, help us file it. Here's all the amendments we've passed since 2001, none of which have been filed, and none of those are in effect until they're filed. So if you pass an amendment, you need to file it, you have to file it by January 10th of the following year for it to remain in effect, but I wouldn't advise waiting. Go ahead and file it. Don't let it get lost in the shuffle, and that way you know it's going to be in effect, and the neighborhood will be bound by it. And the last thing that I see could potentially be an issue with the new HOA Act is self-representation in magistrate court. The magistrate court, like I said, does provide the opportunity for HOAs to represent themselves. A lot of HOAs are organized as LLCs. Anyone here organized as an LLC? Nobody? Anybody here live in Atherton Place? I know you're an LLC. So typically in magistrate court, a business can be represented by a non-lawyer if it's an LLC or any of the other traditional corporate forms. However, what you're going to be careful about is allowing a third-party management company to act as an attorney on behalf of the HOA. There's some case law in South Carolina that says the non-lawyer representative has to spring from the corporate structure of the business that's being represented. And a third-party management company typically, or has recently been held not to conform with that. So just make sure that you are either being represented directly by an officer or an agent of your board or of your company, or hiring an attorney or discussing with an attorney before proceeding to court, filing the liens and things like that. Now it's time for my favorite part, the Q&A. We'll see if you guys can top the weirdest question I've ever had from an HOA. So, does anybody have any questions they'd like to ask? Wow. I wish all my HOA forms was like this. Yes, ma'am.
How would we have known about those changes? I just happened to see it in the newspaper a couple days before the event. How would we have known?
Unfortunately, a lot of people found out like that. I think it's important that if you have a management company, your management company is keeping you up to date with things like that. I think that's one of the big advantages to having a management company is that, you know, they're going to be up on these things. They're going to be keeping you informed, and they're going to be hearing, you know, talk amongst the trade that these things are coming down the pipe. So that's why, you know, I think that's a big advantage of having a management company involved in your HOA governance.
Is there some kind of newsletter or something that we can subscribe to that would help inform us of changes like that in South Carolina law?
There is an HOA association, which I do believe sends out a newsletter quarterly, I believe.
CAI.
That's another one. There you go. That's right.
CAI, Community Association Institute. And your management company can often, if your management company is keeping up with that, they would also inform the board of changes like this, so that you can pass it into your newsletters and other communication, e-blast in your neighborhood, things like that. If you got a management company, keeps up with those kind of things.
Anybody else? Yes, ma'am.
If you had changes to the covenant and it hasn't been amended or recorded, are those changes enforceable?
Depends on when.
How about repeating the question?
Sure, absolutely. So the question, sure. The question is if there are any changes to your covenants that have not been recorded or filed. Is that correct? Are they in effect? Generally, no. And with the new act, anything that is passed after January 10th of a calendar year would need to be filed by January 10th of the next calendar year to remain in effect. So they are in effect on, or at least for bylaws, they're in effect on passage, but you need to go ahead and file them for them to remain in effect through the calendar year. And like I said, I wouldn't advise waiting. I'd say if you pass something, you have it in final form, go ahead and file it. Yes, sir.
But Nate, those changes to your governing documents still have to be voted on and accepted by the ownership.
That's correct. You need any changes.
Recorded or not.
Any changes, of course, need to be done in conformity with your governing documents.
Right.
Yes, sir.
You're saying that all board resolutions need to be filed with South Carolina?
If you're amending a governing document, yes.
So if it's not part of the deeds or restrictions, and we have no, rules and otherwise outside of deeds and restrictions, and say we, enact a board resolution for a fine structure and stuff like that, would that then need to be filed?
If it's a rule or regulation that you want to enforce, yeah, it needs to be of record, so it would need to be filed.
And so what you're saying is that if it went into effect, like say we just signed it and filed it and, all the homeowners were notified, as long as that, say it was after the 9th or whatever, is it still in effect for this year, but as long as it's filed before next year, on the 9th or whatever?
I'm not sure I'm understanding. Okay, are you saying that if it was passed, say, January 11th, when do you need to file it?
Right.
By January 10th of the following year for it to remain in effect, is the way it,
But that calendar year it would be in effect.
yeah, that's the way the act reads.
Okay.
But again, I wouldn't wait. I wouldn't wait 364 days. I'd say just go ahead and file it. Save yourself some heartburn. Yes, sir.
Are there any city regulations or state regulations concerning length of vacancy of a house within an HOA if the covenants themselves do not specify?
Well, I can tell you that your HOA,
So they can't hear.
sure, sorry folks. He's asking if there's any city or state ordinances that determine the length of vacancy of a home if the act doesn't prescribe. I'm sure there is. I haven't researched that issue specifically, but what I can tell you is that your city ordinances, your state laws are going to trump the provisions of your governing documents.
How would we find that out?
Well, you can consult an attorney, and the ordinance and the laws regarding HOAs and tenements are available online through SC Legislature.
Nate, we've got one question back here on the board.
Okay.
To address, city or police laws and ordinances versus HOA rules and regulations. An example, lawn care. City says 12 inches and higher is violation. A neighborhood says 8 inches is a violation. It's an HOA and it's in their rules and regulations.
Mhm.
So how does that, is that a conflict, or does the HOA trump that in that community?
No, it doesn't trump. It just depends on whether you're going to get 1 or 2 fines. So you need to comply with both, obviously. But no, your HOA governing documents are not going to trump city ordinances.
But you could have both.
You could have both. You could be, yeah. If you get to 13 inches, you might be getting 2 tickets, or a ticket and a letter from your management company.
I think on a more deep into that question is HOA documents can be stricter than city without superseding city ordinances.
That is correct.
But your HOA can still enforce a stricter rule and requirement than what the city has.
Yeah, did everybody hear that? They're asking, can your HOA enforce a stricter penalty than a city ordinance, or a stricter requirement than a city ordinance? And the answer is yes. Okay, I think that's all my time. I think we've got, sorry, I left my agenda back there. We've got insurance next, much more interesting. Thank you all for having me tonight. I appreciate it.
My name is Dawn Becker-Durnin, and I'm a licensed property and casualty agent. I am licensed in the state of South Carolina and North Carolina. I'm also licensed in several other states, but we're only going to talk about those 2 for tonight. I'm going to talk about the topic of directors and officers' liability. And that is an insurance that most of the boards and associations have in place. And if you don't, you should be contacting me. Your bylaws, your governing documents will state in the first section of insurance that you are required to have directors and officers liability insurance. So I have the definition here of directors and officers liability. It's commonly known as D&O. So if you hear me say D&O during this presentation, I'm talking about directors and officers coverage. It's a liability insurance which offers protection to the board, as well as individuals that voluntarily serve an association, such as the board of directors, the association itself, and all those that may assist the board. So is anybody here on a committee or volunteer, not a board of directors, but maybe on a committee such as an architectural review committee? Anybody raise their hand? So we have a couple. So the protection that the directors and officers policy will provide is to any employees if the association has any. Sometimes there could be an on-site individual, such as a maintenance man. There could be somebody such as a guard, security guard, or a gate attendant. The other coverage is for committee members, the volunteers. Of course, we also have community association managers. We had a great presentation tonight from McDonald from Kuester, and they discussed about community managers and all the roles that encompasses. Other volunteers assisting at the direction of the board of directors. And it's very important that you note that it says assisting at the direction of the board. We don't want anybody rogue here who forms their own committee and says, hey, I'm the social committee. We're going to have parties every week. All right? I mean, it sounds like a lot of fun, but if it's not sanctioned by the board, it cannot happen. And it will not be covered by the directors and officers liability insurance. So I thought I'd go right into the claims. I mean, that seems to be the best scenario here, and I think that's going to give you the most basic understanding of how the directors and officers policy works. So, common claims are the board's failure to adhere to the bylaws. So the bylaws state specifically what the board can do. When can you hold a meeting? How much can you raise the assessments by? There's other items, of course, that are in the bylaws, and I do recommend that every homeowner, and specifically every board member, read those bylaws very, very thoroughly. There's other issues that could come up, such as the board's failure to properly notice elections. So the board just can't come out and say, hey, we're having an election tomorrow night. Oh, you couldn't make it? Too bad. And then you got the same 5 people who've been on the board every year, and nobody gets an opportunity to volunteer. The board's failure to properly count votes or proxies and challenges by members regarding the power granted to the board by the bylaws. That's actually one of the most common claims that I see. So I disagree with the vote. I want to challenge the vote. I'm a homeowner, and I want to see exactly who voted for who. Other claims could be improper removal of a board member. Decisions by the board that result in physical damage to the association's property. Now, I don't think that's all that common. Most people are really not doing anything that's going to hurt the association's property, but you could hire somebody, or you could have a vendor come out and maybe they're not properly insured. Maybe you knew that beforehand. You know, there's a lot of things that could go into it. There's also challenges to assessments. Who likes to pay their dues here? Not me. Oh, you do? Wow. Well, I want to know why is my dues going up? Why are my assessments being raised? I get a notice every year. I get the budget, and maybe I look at it, maybe I don't. But I don't agree. I don't think you should be raising my assessments. So I'm going to challenge that, and I want to see the budget, and I want to see every little receipt that goes into it. The other items here could be the approval of variances, generally by the architectural committee. An architectural committee claims, I have to tell you, that's a big one. So I want to paint my lawn, I want to paint my house purple. Well, the bylaws state that your homes must be a certain color. Perhaps you have to have certain type of siding. Oftentimes, if you buy a new home, they'll even give you the paint swatches that you need to adhere to. And there's 4 colors, and you cannot deviate from that. But you really want a purple house. So you paint your house purple, and now the board has sent you a fine, or your management company has advised you that you have violated the bylaws, and you will be fined, and you must paint your house back to one of the colors that was specifically noted in the bylaws. So challenges to the Architectural Review Committee, that's a big deal. We see them all the time. It could be fences. I said the painting in the house. It could be fences. It could be perhaps even putting out flowers. We want you to have specific flowers that are inherent to this area. We don't want any cross-pollination. I mean, it gets crazy. There's some really specific rules, and you have to follow it. And a lot of people who move into a community just don't even understand. They have no idea, and you say, but you chose to live in this community. These are the rules that we have, and that's the reason that our community is so wonderful, and we would like to keep it. We have a standard here. So others would be questions or challenges. Oh, I'm sorry, I said that. The board's failure to maintain the common areas. A lot of associations work with management companies, and Karen did bring up that there's often times where they have to go through the neighborhood and they have to say, hey, neighbor, you didn't take care of your lawn. Hey, neighbor, you didn't take care of your garbage and you didn't put it inside. And you repeatedly do this. So once, maybe you get a warning, maybe twice, now you get a fine. The board's failure to properly disclose funds. So insurance proceeds, maybe there was a claim that happened and the board does not take the money and put it into rebuilding, or they take some of the proceeds and give themselves a little check. Hey, I helped administrate this claim. I spent a lot of hours. I deserve a couple bucks. Well, board members, that is not supposed to happen. And actually, you'd be really surprised. That happens often. So, and then the last one is defamation or discrimination by the board or the community manager. So people will say to me, well, how could that happen? Where would discrimination come into effect? So if you have a clubhouse, maybe you have rules about who can rent the clubhouse and when they can rent the clubhouse. There was a large claim in South Carolina involving a religious organization that wanted to rent the clubhouse. And the board said, no, you may not. We do not allow religious organizations to commune in our clubhouse. I'm sorry. Well, it turned out that they couldn't turn them away. And the law sided with this religious organization. They were members of the HOA. And they said, you're wrong, board. And what happened? The board had to go back and do training. And they had to get educated about what is discrimination. And they also had to have some courses. It cost a lot of money. Their community manager also had to attend. So, the board, there's some important tenets that board members have. And one is the duty of care. What's the duty of care? Educating yourselves, researching, making sure that you are making the best decisions possible on behalf of your community. You should never be self-serving. Remember, you are serving the community at large, not yourself personally. You must hold regular meetings. Those meetings, whether the bylaws state that they need to be held at a certain time, you have to adhere to that. You need to pass budgets properly. A board must look at all the finances and make sure that they are properly assessing a community. How do some boards do that? Perhaps they work with a community manager. Karen, one of her slides had something about a reserve study. A reserve study is done typically by an engineering firm, and they actually look at your community. They look at your roads. They look at the roofs on the building if it's a townhome community or a condo association. They may look at your sewers and grates, and they'll tell the association, this is what it will cost to repair these items in 20 years because that's the life expectancy of this item. Now the board has to say, okay, what do we need to put in our assessment so we make sure that in 20 years we can replace that item? Very important. The other thing is to defer to professionals. Your community manager, your attorneys, your CPAs, insurance professionals. You also have to avoid arbitrary actions. You must follow the governing documents. I can't tell you how many times we've had claims in, and it has to do with the board not adhering to the bylaws. The interest of the community collectively comes first. You have a duty of loyalty. You have to act in the best interest of the community at all times and avoid conflicts of interest. So if Jim has a construction firm and he knows that you're about to build a dam in your community and he says, that's fine, my guys are going to handle it, well, that may not be in the best interest of the community. Where's the transparency? Is there a formal bid process? Is Jim just going to get the job because he lives here? That may not be fair. You must also maintain confidentiality. I know there's always that one homeowner who's a real pleasure, real fun girl, real fun guy, and they have nothing better to do but complain all the time. And maybe they have valid issues, maybe they don't, but you can't go running to the other board members or most importantly to the other homeowners and tell them what Jim or Sally said. It's just not appropriate. The other item, and last but not least, is the duty to act within your scope of authority. I mean, you're a board member, but you have to remember you're not the police. So you can't go into someone's home and tell them to knock something off. You know, turn down that music, you can't have a party. You know, you must mow your lawn right now and I'm going to stand here until you do it. I mean, that doesn't make for a happy community, but it happens. The other, and how we do that is adhering to the CCRs and the bylaws. And most importantly, as Nate said, you need to, of course, pay attention to your local, state, and federal laws. Those will supersede your bylaws. So, the board of directors has fiduciary roles and responsibilities. Those are enforcement of the bylaws and the CCRs, establishing fiscal policies, and maintaining records. Records are very important, board of directors. Sometimes something may come up 3 or 4 years from now, and you'll need to have clear records because what's important to know is that a director's and officer's policy is often a claims-made policy. So there's a retroactive date on the policy. So let's say it started in 2000. Well, if there was records that needed to be held from 1994 and a claim happened in 1994, the policy probably wouldn't cover it because it's starting in 2000 with the coverage. But those documents would be useful. Now, you have to look at your state laws and say, well, how long do we have to keep documents? I would recommend electronic coordination of your documents, perhaps even, and this is a big recommendation that I make often, having a board having an email account where every board member has their own email address that's associated with the community. So, for example, I live in Copper Run Homeowners Association. I serve on my board. My email address is CPRRun1. So then others is CPRRun2. Now, you want to know why that's important? I get subpoenaed. Somebody's suing me. And I use my personal email. Well, guess what? They get all the funny jokes. They get all the pictures. They get all the good stuff because they have to go through my personal email just to get homeowners association emails. That's not fun. But when you get subpoenaed, they go through everything. So I would recommend to the board maybe having a separate account, putting electronic documents in there, and always keeping it updated. Google Docs is a great way. Developing a working budget and your assessment rates. Appointment of committees and delegating authority. Selection of an attorney, a community manager, an insurance agent, CPA, and other professionals. Obtaining and maintaining adequate insurance protection as per the bylaws. Most bylaws will state that you need to have $1 million of directors and officers liability. See that the association is protected for all acts of all parties with fiscal responsibilities. So, I gave you guys a little checklist. Everybody should have that. And I thought you could take that home and maybe look at your own directors and officers policy and see if you're covered. So what is the important thing? Who is covered? Now, not all directors and officers liability policies are the same. Some directors and officers policies are what we call basic, meaning that they're packaged in with the general liability. I will tell you right now, I do not recommend that. If you have your directors and officers liability insurance packaged with your general liability, you must immediately go to your insurance agent and ask them to put the insurance on a standalone policy for directors and officers. And I'll tell you why. It's a basic policy when it's included with the general liability. Should you have a general liability claim, it's going to affect your D&O. If you have a D&O claim, it's going to affect your general liability. But basic policies typically exclude non-monetary claims. What's a non-monetary claim? The Architectural Review Committee is disputing that you should paint your fence purple, green, yellow. Homeowner says, I get to do what I want, and sues. The homeowner is not suing for a new fence. The homeowner is suing for the right to do something. They don't want money. They want the ability to make a change. That is a non-monetary action. The association has cut down the trees. I am mad. Those trees were wonderful. That's why I bought my end unit. Now I feel that I've lost monetary value of my unit. So I'm going to force the board to replant trees, and that happens. So are prior officers and board members included? Is the estate, is the spouse or their estate of a board member included? On a basic policy, not often, but on a standalone policy, yes. Are committee members included? On a basic policy, no, but on a standalone, yes. Are trustees, are volunteers included? What about your property manager? You are asking your community manager to do things like enforcement. And if somebody brings a suit against your property manager, they're acting on your behalf at your request. They're not doing this because they want to. They're doing it because you have asked them to do it. That is why you've hired them. So if they do something that somebody doesn't agree with and files suit, they need protection under your insurance policy. Of course, the management company does have their own errors and omissions insurance, their own crime policy, and their own general liability, but they are working as your agent. Are employees included? Is the builder or developer community? Anybody here have a brand new home? No? Okay, one. So that's important when the board transitions from a community developer. Often D&O policies will exclude the developer. So you want to double check that. Now, what is covered? Can the board choose their own legal representation? Maybe I want to hire an attorney of my own choice. The board says that they work with a local attorney, they have comfortability with him. Does the insurance company determine who I'm going to hire? You need to ask these questions in advance. Are legal costs that are incurred through investigations that don't result in litigation, is that covered? So I have expenses while I'm trying to figure out if this is actually going to be a claim, and nobody sued me, but I've incurred costs. Is that covered? You want to know that. Is defense subject to the deductible or self-insured retention? Often a standalone D&O will have a deductible, usually $1,000 or $2,500. Or they could have a self-insured retention, which means the association is responsible for the first $1,000 or $2,500. What is the time period of coverage? Is it retroactive? When do I have coverage? When does it start? How far back does it go? I've been on the board for 4 years. If they have a retroactive date that started a year ago, I'm in trouble. You know what that means? I don't have coverage for the first 3 years. I've paid for a policy and I don't have insurance coverage. That's a big deal. Is discrimination, defamation, and libel included? So you have a board member who gets really angry. Has anybody ever been to a board meeting and there's a fight that breaks out? Because I go to a lot of board meetings and there's a lot of fighting. And sometimes people call other people names. And sometimes people write it. Facebook, we got a lot of keyboard warriors, as I like to call them, and they'll go on Facebook and they write some pretty scandalous things. And if they're on board and they're writing, they're mad. And so they'll write something that's horrible. And I'm going, oh my gosh, did they even think about that? No, they were angry. They just wanted to get it out and they wanted to be mean as possible. And then the board member sues the other board member. Is named insured versus named insured included? Can the board sue the developer? Can a board sue the other board? Meaning like the board members sue each other? Is that covered? Important to ask your agent. Non-monetary damages, I already talked about that. Is punitive damages covered? Now, punitive damages when the judge says, you know what, that was so bad. You guys are just so awful that I'm going to make sure that you're going to pay. I'm going to put a fine on top of that to make sure that you never do that again. Is noise pollution covered? And yes, that is a claim that associations get for neighbors that are repeatedly having a loud party and the homeowner feels that the board is not doing enough for them to make it stop. And breach of contract. You hire a contractor and perhaps they don't fulfill their duties. Or maybe you, the association, doesn't fulfill your duties. You sign a contract and then you say to the guy, you know what, We were wrong. Can't afford it. See you later. And the guy says, wait a minute here. I stopped everything I was doing. I was going to go to your association and re-roof everything, and now my guys are out. So I'm going to sue you for breach of contract. Very important. So that is basically it. If you guys have any questions, please let me know. A little bit about myself. I'm from New Jersey originally. Not sure if you could tell. I mean, it comes out a little bit. So I'm the vice president in my office. I actually live in Waxhaw, North Carolina. And a little funny thing about me, I am actually a former firefighter. I was a firefighter for over 20 years. My background is in risk management. And through the fire service, I also gained some knowledge about building construction. So real estate has always been something that I've been involved with since I was a very young girl. Worked for my uncle's real estate company. And I've been in the community insurance program now for over 10 years. And we only specialize in community insurance. Now, we do have other offices because NFP is the 5th largest insurance agent in the country, 10th in the world. We are privately owned, but this community program is just individuals like myself who come out to educate homeowners and board members so that you can make the proper decisions and feel comfortable with doing it. We also feel that the more education that board members and homeowners have, the better decisions that they make, and obviously it cuts down on claims. We would really like to see insurance costs go down. I know you don't believe me. It's true. I really don't like to have people paying expensive, insurance policies. I really do want people to have the most competitive, best-priced policies. So if there's any questions, I'm back in the back. Please take all my water bottles, take all the flashlights. I do not want to carry anything home. Thank you, everybody.